Hey, 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 what's up? Welcome to my channel. I'm Liz, and today I am excited to come on and just share some of these thoughts that are flowing through me right now after reading Greg Lukianoff and Jonathan Haidt's article and piece on Coddling the American Mind. If you haven't checked that piece out, I'm linking their original Atlantic article below in the notes, so you can reference that there. But, just to give you a little overview of what's flowing through me with this and why I'm excited about this piece or excited to respond to this piece is um, because, I myself, my work is all about collective trauma and collective healing. We Heal for All's mission and passion and mandate is this question of what can we take from what we know about individual healing and apply it to the collective, apply it to the way that we operate as institutions, as schools, as households, as organizations, nonprofit organizations, and how we can do so within the context of this larger cultural changes, these larger cultural shifts that are going on in our world with the advancements in technology, within shifts in power dynamics and greater awareness of our history and of intergenerational trauma, historical trauma, institutional trauma, and ultimately how we can go about both designing and setting up our world, and then also living and being active members of this world in a way that supports us all better, in a way that creates space that is conducive and supportive for more of us to thrive and our unique flavors and unique perspectives to be able to shine and really be of service in the way that their God-given spiritual potential is meant to do. So, again, I wanted to use this piece as a starting off point because what they do, and what I want to do is just read a little intro paragraph just to give you a taste of it in case you are not familiar with this piece of work. Their initial article came out in 2015 and it went viral, and then they put out a book in 2018. And so the title of the book is The Coddling of the American Mind: How Good Intentions and Bad Ideas Are Setting Up a Generation for Failure. And they say something has been going wrong on many college campuses in the last few years. Speakers are shouted down, students and professors say they are walking on eggshells and are afraid to speak honestly. Rates of anxiety, depression, and suicide are rising. What is happening? Okay, so it gives you a little bit of a sense of what this book is about and what type of trends are documented that are going on campus around microaggressions, around trigger warnings, around the revoking of invitations of speakers, and yeah, just essentially these culture shifts, these changes that are going on in terms of dynamics within the student body, dynamics within administrators and faculty members, and then also the dynamics between students and faculty members. So what I was really excited to see in terms of Lukianoff and Haidt's approach to answering these questions and looking at these trends is that from Lukianoff's own personal lived experiences with depression, he really pulls from a therapeutic modality called cognitive behavioral therapy in looking at what type of psychological tenets are used and applied to individual cases of anxiety and depression, and what types of parallels are we seeing at the cultural level, collective level within universities, and how might the ways that universities are responding to students' pleas and students organizing around these topics of trigger warnings and de-inviting people, how the institution's responses to these may or may not be in alignment with these tenets within the cognitive behavioral field of practice. So first and foremost, very cool that he did that because I think it's a really needed thing. And I think it's very interesting. There's so many layers that I'm excited to get into with you and hear what you think. Um, because I really approach all of these conversations and inquiries with a lot of humility. And I do that not because I'm not excited about my ideas or I don't think that they have merit, but because these topics that we're talking about, whether it's shifts in culture, shifts in power dynamics, collective trauma, oppression, histories of oppression, um, just the way that institutions practice or operate at a very, day-to-day institutional policy level. All of these things are very complex and have many moving parts to them. Um, and I think that the more humility that, or what I've found for myself, I'll put it this way, the more humility that I can approach these and curiosity I can approach these conversations and topics with, um, the more I find that new, deeper insights are invited forth within me, and I hope to invite them out in you as well, and co-create some answers around this because I think it's a very understandable thing to say that we don't have answers to all these things yet. And I think that's, again, pulling from psychology, pulling from wisdom traditions within spirituality. It's a really grounded place to start. Um, so, okay, let's just kind of dive in here. Um, So Lukianoff and Haidt, some of their critiques of what they see going on within college campuses is almost this like weakening and softening of students through this hyper protectionism, through this focus on safetyism, safe spaces. Uh, and their critiques around this, and they point out some really interesting cases and interesting trends that they're seeing. Lukianoff himself is a constitutional lawyer who defends First Amendment rights within university settings, and so he's got loads and loads of data that he references within this, which I think is always really helpful whenever we're having these conversations. But he cites the article cites some examples of how, for instance, at Harvard Law, professors um, coming up against students advocating for rape law not to be taught or even using the word violate within classroom settings out of concern that it might be harmful, emotionally harmful to one of their fellow students. Um, there's so just to give you a sense of some of the anecdotes and some of the cases that they reference within this. And again, the main, so kind of the two main lenses that the piece takes is around this culture war First Amendment rights perspective, and then also this cognitive behavioral perspective. Um, and there's a lot that we can talk about in this culture war First Amendment perspective. And I come from like a left-leaning, progressive, liberal space. Those are the circles I run in. I myself identify with the social justice movement and have been immersed in it and informed by it throughout my entire professional career. Um, but more what I really am interested in, and no doubt that'll come into play as I share my thoughts here. But more what I'm interested in is this application of cognitive behavioral therapy and understanding the experiences that students are having around topics of identity, topics of systems of oppression, and again of this greater aspiration of how do we create spaces, how do we create institutions, learning settings, communities where more people are comfortable to be themselves, where more of themselves are welcomed and understood within this space, and therefore are able to thrive. and are able to create more of this multidimensional resonance that's truly, truly needed in the world, right? Diversity is the wealth of life. We know this from our ecosystems that make up our world, right? So how do we do this? How do we do this at a social level, cultural level, and then how do we do that at an institutional level? How do we train our people? How do we set up policies to do that? So I think again, their work makes some really cool parallels and does some really cool things. But I think the thing that it's most lacking, or yeah, it's most missing is an understanding of trauma. Um, and what we know these days, and I'll connect all the dots here in a second, but what we know these days from the fields of clinical psychology, from the fields of neuroscience, and just the cutting edge research that's out there around what emotions are, how emotions operate, what their function is, evolutionarily speaking, and present day, and then also how trauma works, right? And trauma is one of these words that's really gained a lot of popularity in more recent years, which is awesome. That means that our consciousness as a society is growing around this, and it also means that we're at risk of diluting our understanding of it as a world. And that's honestly the case with all of these big complex topics. You know, as we further learn and further awaken to the way that our world works and operates, to the way that we operate as unique individuals, which is the opportunity we have in this age of information and communication, there is the risk of these very complicated, complex topics becoming very distilled, and then therefore misunderstandings happening. So, for the purpose of this conversation here with you right now, let's define trauma and understand trauma, look at trauma through the lens of um, trauma being any type of emotional experience that happens within one's life that is too overwhelming or too much to bear for our nervous system. And our nervous system is more than just the brain and our skulls, but it's actually your entire body, right? And the all the nerves that exist in our entire body. Um, so when we do not have the capacity within our own system, within our own nervous system, to process strong emotional energy, a strong emotional experience, um, then our system, in its amazing capacity for resilience, blocks that out, right? It exiles that part of our experience, right? It kind of stores it in the ethers of our consciousness until we are at a point in our development when we are in an environment, when we are surrounded by relationships or resources that can then help us bring it back into view, look at it, address it, heal it, work with it, process it, and then integrate it, right? And that's coming back towards wholeness. So again, within my mission and curiosity around what can we take from what we know about that mechanism that exists within all of us as individuals and apply it to the mechanism or apply it to figuring out what's happening at a collective level. You know, what is happening at a university level that these trends of trigger warnings or trying to of protectionism, however you want to frame it. And again, I'm sourcing from their language here. Why are these trends happening? And you know, they go into a lot of social trends, looking at parenting, looking at the use of social media, and I think they're interesting. But essentially, their take on this is that oh, shoot, people are getting softer. We're just trying to like earmuff everyone from the challenging things in these worlds, and it's ultimately debilitating people, debilitating young people. My personal take, and again, I'm super curious to hear you think is that it has more to do with this larger shift in culture and power dynamics that's taking place in our world. And in particular, like I was pointing to earlier, I think it has a lot to do with our growing awareness and awakening around our history, around even what power dynamics are. The use of cognitive behavioral therapy to address and help someone with trauma is definitely plausible and definitely something that works for many people. Um, Cognitive behavioral therapy is all about this triangle of influence between our thoughts, our behaviors, and our emotions. And it's the idea that if we can become more aware of our thoughts and of cognitive distortions, right? Catastrophizing things or always seeing the worst in a situation, then we can better calm our emotions and also shift our behaviors. We won't be so scared to take that risk, etc. So much value in this. And again, what we know from the latest and greatest research around trauma and around the mind-body connection is that that approach doesn't work for everyone. That approach doesn't work for every type of trauma. And more and more, the most effective approaches to trauma are more emotion-centered, right? They're healing-oriented. So we can think about therapeutic modalities falling into two camps, the insight-oriented camp and the healing-oriented camp, with the insight-oriented camp being that cognitive approach, right? Really centering the what's happening in therapy, what's happening between you and your therapist is really exploring your mind, exploring the stories that run through your mind or that you use to understand your world. Whereas a more healing-oriented approach is more emotion-centered, right? Where it's not even about the stories that are attached to the feelings and sensations that are going on within you. It's more about connecting with those sensations in your body. Emotional mindfulness, becoming more aware when you are emotionally activated and taking time to listen to those emotions, to those sensations, and further understand what types of needs or wants your body is communicating to you, your mind, your being is communicating to you. So here we are in a day and age where students on campuses, young people, my generation, millennials and Gen Zers are really crying out about pain that they're feeling, right? Are really crying out about feelings of unfairness and feelings of injustice and experiences of injustice and just feelings happening within our systems and within our communities. And we've got to learn how to listen to that. And we've got to learn and figure out what practices from the fields of traumatology, from the fields of interpersonal neurobiology can help or be applied as practices within our institutions, within our classroom settings, within the way that we equip teachers to be in relationship with students. Because I'm of the mind and belief that these collective traumas around oppression, around our long history of oppression, our long history of the way our world operating being based on power dynamics of dominance, of one group exerting dominance over another group in order to get them to do what that first group wants them to do, you know? Here we are at a point in time when we're saying we can do better than that. And there are so many cool models and groups of people who are deeply immersed in figuring out how best to do that. And I think the reality is that we haven't figured it out yet, you know? We haven't figured out how best to balance both hearing and validating students' very real feelings, right? Because the feelings are real, right? The feelings are very real, while also not allowing the trauma to lead. And what do I mean by that? So we care for the trauma, we create space for the trauma, we acknowledge the trauma's presence, and we don't operate in a way that allows the trauma to lead. Because what can happen when trauma leads is that it can create more trauma sometimes. You know, we can, the way that it works, even at a neuroscientific level, is that one of the main ways that the brain operates and learns is through associations. So when we are in a traumatized state, and what I mean by that is when we are either very aware of our own trauma, aware of collective trauma, aka injustices, historical present day, when that trauma that had been exiled is coming back into our view for us to look at, to understand how it unconsciously, subconsciously drives our behaviors, our decisions, the relationships that we find ourselves in, unhealthy patterns, right? In that process, when trauma comes back into our conscious view or is in our conscious view, it can be the only thing that we see. It can be one of the main things that we see, right? It becomes our lens. As we, put on those goggles in understanding our own trauma and looking for patterns associated with trauma within our own system, or looking out for dynamics in our lives that are a product of that trauma or are further keeping us in a state of victimhood or taking away our power in some kind of way at a personal level, we can begin to see those dynamics everywhere. It's the way that the brain naturally works. And so here students are, coming into adulthood, learning about topics related to oppression and injustice for the first time for many of them, right? And so connecting with and tapping into these collective wounds, these collective traumas, which absolutely indelibly connect to one's own personal traumas and personal wounds. So here we have this environment, this container of these collective wounds coming to the surface to be better understood, and hopefully being healed and being better integrated. But I don't think we've gotten there yet. We haven't figured out how to help these collective wounds heal yet. And I think it has a lot to do with our cultural perspective on emotions, even though, again, that we have all of this cutting edge research about uh, the function, the real deep survival level function of emotions, we have yet to integrate that into the way that we understand the world. Uh, so I think that's part of what our opportunity here is to look at what's coming through our young people. Look at the pain that's coming through our young people and not just dismiss it as them being weak or soft or um, not equipped with the tools that past generations had in terms of grit, in terms of, um, all these other things, because, past generations, God bless them, intergenerational learning, there's so much, and that's what I'm saying, I think that this article is really cool in a lot of ways, and it feels like it's from a different generation, a generation that really does believe in mind over matter, that really takes a Cartesian approach to understanding what the self is. I am that which I know, or whatever that is. But, that very mind-based, that very cognitive-based approach, and even that, which can so often happen, they reference Stoicism and Buddhism within the article as well. And that within our Western society, those wisdom traditions often do get interpreted and translated into, okay, well, I can, into mind over matter, right? Into this idea that I can just, if I just shift my thinking enough, then I can have control over the way that I'm feeling. And there's that power dynamic again, right? There's that power dynamic again. Being able to exert force over the thing that you don't want to see, right? Or over the thing that is perceived as being, you know, too much, too messy, too wild, too much that you can't understand. So the cool thing is that the fields of psychology and neuroscience are really speaking a different tune in regards to this stuff, right? And there's so much cool tools out there that I'm excited to share more of in these videos with you on what might be helpful in this question inquiry of what can we apply to the collective level? What can we apply to the way that, like, how can we train teachers to take more of a therapeutic approach in their classrooms? But what does that actually mean? Right? Because they're not therapists and it's not a one-on-one dyadic type of a relationship. So more questions than answers all around, but I mean, that's cool in and of itself. The fact that we live in this day and age where we have access to so many different perspectives, I'm getting a little bit teary, is like the coolest. I'm so glad to be alive at this day and age. High five, soul, for choosing this time. And I hope that you are too, even though this time can feel really scary and daunting and overwhelming and stifling and oppressive in its own right. Even though there are so many advancements we've made and so much progress we've made around justice, it can still very much feel like we've regressed in different ways, or we can just really feel the pain of past injustice and current injustice in a way that I think past generations have in their own right, but that we are in a new way, right? We are in a new way, and I believe in that wholeheartedly. I believe that we have access to the internet and so much information about the way that our system and world operates for a reason. And part of that reason is to heal these past traumas, these institutional traumas, these collective traumas that do get passed down intergenerationally, do live in our bodies, do live in our institutions, right? They live in our institutions because they're embedded in them. And so here we are with opportunity at our doorstep to see that, recognize that, to understand it in a new way through this trauma-informed lens, through this a spiritual lens, Um, and then to heal it, to transmute it, to actualize its potential, to free up some of the energy that keeps it stuck in those patterns. So, from my home to yours, with a lot of humility and gratitude for this journey that we are all on together, and for deep appreciation for all the different perspectives that we all offer to this, and in great hope that there's more spaces out there, and the space that I create um, can really support and be of service to all of those unique perspectives, your unique perspective being shared and heard and interwoven into this larger fabric of society that we're building together every single day, every time we interact with each other, and so on and so on. Thank you for checking this out. Please, subscribe, like this video if you're feeling it. Send me a comment. I'm got another community platform that I'm building out right now, which is really going to be a home base for this co-created wisdom, for this dialogue. So keep an eye out for that. And you can find out more about the work that I do at wehealforall.com. It's in the notes. So yeah, so much love. Take care.